Hey everyone and welcome. In this video we're going to talk about how to make a conscious transition into non-physicality. So basically after I made the nostril expansion video and open VCI video, which you should definitely check out if you haven't, then I figured that I should give some explanation how I'm making these conscious transitions. These conscious transitions being what would be called as wild, out-of-body experience, astral projection. We're not going to focus on where we end up after we make these transitions, but essentially when we look at the literature and when we look at the techniques, we find out that for all these things, you basically make the same moves, you make the same actions to make your way consciously and fluidly into those realms. So we're going to focus on how is it actually done and what is actually happening in the process. So when we talk about getting into those realms, then you usually have this kind of roundabout techniques that you do during the day, and then they take some effect and you end up conscious there. This one is when you stay conscious while making that transition. You stay conscious kind of the entire time or most of it as you lie down, and you just end up there without blacking out. So just putting this on the table, you've probably heard about the steps of how to do this if you checked it out on the web, and the steps are basically the same, but what I think I can give from my own experience is much of those fine details that I don't think that you'll find anywhere else. I didn't really hear any of them. So this is like the holy grail for anyone looking to end up in non-physical reality, right? To be able to go there whenever you so wish to. And as far as my own experience goes, as to this day, I can say that I'm not successful every time that I do it, but most of the times I am, to the point where more or less I do this twice a week. Now, what happens after you make the transition, working out with the stability, that's something else. But I am successful on doing the transition and getting there. And we'll talk about the many different things that can happen on the way to while we're making this amazing, mind-blowing transition. So, before we get to the details, and I might need to actually make this video two-part. I don't know, we'll see how long this ends up. But before we start, you guessed it, it's story time. Bing! Yes, there's a story. Before we get to the details, let's go back. I'm going to take us back to 2 points in my life that are connected to this kind of learning how to do this conscious transition. The first one being a while back when I was in my early 20s. I'm 32 years old to this day, and I was living with my parents, and we kind of renovated the apartment, and I needed to stay with my grandparents for like 3 months. And during that time, that was also the time where I came back to lucid dreaming, and it was pretty cool and interesting. And one of the things that really caught my curiosity, and this was way before I even went online and knew about techniques and knew about what is a wild and all that thing. I was really curious to find out, to understand what happens when we fall asleep, right? Because usually what we do is we decide that we are tired, we lie down in bed, we close our eyes, and we black out. Basically we just black out, we wake up afterwards, and we have memories of what had happened in the night, usually the dreams. But I was really curious to understand, what is this blacking out, what happens here? So when I thought about this, I just very logically I understood that we are not able to build a memory of what happens here when we close our eyes and fall asleep, because we're not conscious at that point, right? And when we are conscious, in a certain degree, we build memories of it. So just thinking, really wanting to understand what is happening, I figured out that to be able to experience this point in our sleep, I will have in some way sustain a certain level of consciousness while falling asleep. It was just like this logical conclusion to be able to build a memory of what's happening there, if it is a point that we just completely black out and stay unconscious. So in order to do this, the way I played it out, it was this one night. I did it once at that time, and I called it like the death night, not because it was connected to death specifically or had any experience of dying, but it was just horrible. So at that time, for me, it was really hard to fall asleep on my back. I would usually fall asleep on my stomach. Nowadays, I can fall asleep in pretty much any posture, but what I decided to do is to go to sleep on my back. So I'm tired, but it's hard for me to fall asleep on my back, so it helps to sustain, this level of awareness. And I would just, at that night, close my eyes and try to fall asleep on my back. And then you get to this point where your body just naturally wants to like twist to the side, so you'll be more comfortable sleeping. And I would twist, and then I like just remember what I'm doing. I'm like, no, and I go back on my back and try to just stay asleep on my back, to have this level of awareness, to see what is happening, trying to see from moment to moment what is the experience that is unfolding. And basically what happened that time was that during this night when I wake up and fall asleep again, and consciousness is blah 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 doing all this then suddenly I started feeling my legs walking. I saw nothing, there was no visual, but I felt my legs walking. I didn't feel my physical body of bed, I just felt my legs walking. And feeling this, I kind of like, put myself into it more and more, and I started running. And I'm just feeling my body running, and then the rest of the body, not just the legs, seeing nothing still. But when I kept doing this, the experience unfolded, and suddenly the visual came up, and I was running in a street in the city that I grew up in. I know this street, and I'm running there in the street at night. I look up and I see this alien wearing a suit hovering in the middle of the air, and I fly towards him, go through him, not in this majestical, beautiful way. I didn't feel anything, just like going through walls usually, and I wake up. I wake up exhilarated. I wake up, so amazed, so having this feeling of successfully actually making, understanding what is happening in this transition to some degree, and also from the experience itself. And it was quite beautiful, because usually to this point in my life, I would get lucid, be in the dream and suddenly realize, it's a dream. But at that point, I never really actually lost my awareness, because I have maintained it in some way during this whole process. So I just had this like, fluid transition in a way into the dream, seeing kind of how it built up around me. And then I never had this point of, it's a dream, because I never really lost awareness. That was a really, strong experience in my own development, which is connected to understanding how to make this conscious transition. I kind of didn't keep up with it at the time. And the next point in my time that I wanted to take us was post-COVID. It was really before COVID started, actually like leading into it. But at that time, I was in Guatemala. And in Guatemala, there is a beautiful lake called Lake Atitlan. The story goes that there are ruins inside the lake, and if you go out of body and explore there, you might see them, as they were before. Around this lake, there are different towns, villages. One of them is San Marcos. In San Marcos, there is a meditation center called Las Pirámides del Cap, which they teach lucid dreaming and astral projection. I kind of heard about this place before, and I was actually, I went to Guatemala and I was in Mexico before, just doing a completely different edge experience, which is the breatharian experience, the living on prana, which really requires a whole playlist by itself. So we're not going to go into the details what that is specifically, but I will say just a few words. It's basically when you learn to exist without eating, without chewing, and sometimes without drinking also. It kind of depends. We'll leave this to another playlist. It's huge and beautiful and amazing and very, very interesting. But that was the reason I was in Guatemala, and I've heard of this place before, but I actually went there for completely different reasons. And you know, the way life twists everything around, and I ended up there. And in Las Pirámides del Ca, they have two kinds of courses. I think the first one is 1 month, and the second is 2 months. And the one they teach, which is the moon courses. The moon course is 1 month, the sun course is 2 months, if I remember correctly. I'm going to put a link in the description for this place. Beautiful place. Really recommend you to check it out. So they teach many things in this 1 month, and there's a specific week about lucid dreaming and astral projection. And of course, life took me there exactly when that week started. And what I like in this place is that you can buy the whole bundle. You can even sleep there if you want, you know, pay for the whole month. But they also made an option that you pay per session, and it's not really that expensive, and that's what I did. So during that time, having, you know, this kind of atmosphere and having a lot of free time, I also decided that this is a good time in my practice, after years of experience, that I can start really, you know, honing that skill of making a conscious transition into the dream. And the way I did it was at that time. So like I said so before, there are many, many techniques on how to get this done, how to make this transition. But what I decided to do was take everything that I've known about this, all the techniques that I heard about and tried some of them, and just throw them away. You know, again, you know how I like to go to the roots of everything, and just throw everything away, throw all the techniques away, and just make a much more pure exploration of how this is done. And to do this, what I did was I spent 2 to 3 hours a day just lying down, just falling asleep, and trying to stay conscious like I did that first time in these 2 3 hours, and just observe what is happening as we are slowly dimming down from this world and coming into the non-physical part of reality. And that is, like you can imagine, takes a lot of patience and takes a lot of time, and you deal a lot with doubt when you do this. We'll get into the details soon, but just in general, what had happened was that some of the times I just lay there and nothing happened. Some of the times I fell asleep, and and eventually what happened was that on the 10th time, I remember that I did, on the 10th day, doing this day to day, I just flat got thrown out from my body. I remember this, you know, getting thrown out from the body, from down from the bed on the floor, and just, you know, being out. And it didn't hurt, of course, because it's non-physical reality, but it was just, you know, an amazing experience. Just a few seconds and I go back to the body, but still, you know, again, having this feeling of success that I actually did it. I managed to make this transition, to learn how to do it. And that was the first steps for me. Afterward, COVID came. I might have had more successful times when I was in Guatemala. COVID came and I had to go back home, which made no sense because in Guatemala at that time, you know, there was like basically no one sick from COVID, and back here in Israel, everybody were like in quarantine and stuff. But it felt like the right thing to do, so I came back home. And then there was so much time still because everybody was in quarantine. Everybody were in quarantine, and I spent my I don't know if you hear this, but anyways, I spent my COVID days just keeping on this exploration. You know, spending a lot of time being able to see how we're making this transition, what is happening in this really pure way of exploring, seeing from moment to moment, and understanding what is happening. Gotta wait for this to finish, I think. And we're back. Right. So I live in a city in Israel, which is a mixture of religions. It's also Judaism, Muslim, and Christianity. So what you heard back there was the muezzin. Anyways, so as you can see, I'm not really going to offer you a specific technique here rather than an exploration of understanding what is happening. If you're looking for that quick way to get into non-physicality, the dream, the astral, whatever you want to call it, then there are different techniques that will be much easier than this. Recently, I've been exposed to the Raduga techniques of the phase, which I really recommend. I think they're really good. But if you do want to hone this skill of eventually getting to a point after a practice, like any other things, right? Even if you want to be a painter, it's not like your first painting will be amazing, right? You have to hone the skill. So this is the same thing here. If you are interested in this kind of, preparation, if this kind of training, you gotta ask yourself, because as you can see, from my perspective, the way I did it, you really have to spend time. You just need to ask yourself if you have the time, if you have the patience to do this, because it's not like this other techniques that are easier to do, take little of your time. I don't want to put any negative beliefs in you, but from my experience, it does take some time. Everybody is different. Some people will be more natural, it will happen faster for them. But as you can see, for me, it took me a few years to get to this point again where I am right now, where I can do this something like twice a week and be successful at making the transition. So what is happening actually when we make the transition? What is happening along the way? So what I've learned, the first thing I've learned from the experiences is when we look on our five senses, right? We can say that there is a certain pace, a certain way that the senses get withdrawn from the physical when we fall asleep, right? So for basically you lie down in bed, you close your eyes, so the sight is gone first, and then when you keep just relaxing yourself and drowning in this conscious state and actually falling asleep, then the sense of touch starts to get a bit blurry. Somewhere along the way you start hearing from the outside, and there is this succession of the senses just withdrawing from the physical. And the same way, kind of in the reverse way, these senses start to emerge in non-physicality. So usually what I would experience was the senses emerging, and like that first example that I gave you, they're emerging in a reverse way. Like you can sometimes start hearing before even seeing, or feeling your body before there's actual any visual. And usually, in my experience, the visual comes last. Kind of depends how you do it. But so it's nice to understand what is happening with our senses. When we make this transition, also a lot of the times I would feel, when you're really going into this in-between state that we get to experience in sleep paralysis, that we get to experience in many of these waking ups, that we wake up a little bit and fall back asleep. And you can see sometimes and feel how thoughts start to gain weight, how they actually start to have some substance, because essentially, eventually, they become the dream. They build up this non-physical reality to an extent. And it's so beautiful because sometimes you can really see it happening because you are just sustaining your consciousness. So one of the ways this can happen is that you follow your hypnagogia, right? These visuals that we have when we are just drowsy and we're falling asleep, which start abstract, and then slowly you get some images just flowing by, and then afterwards they stay a little longer, and then it's like a short video that stays before it goes away. But if you can keep your consciousness, keep conscious when this is happening, eventually you will just end up inside. You'll end up in it. It will build up around you. Some experiences that I had were, and I think I talked about this in the Dark Room playlist, which you are completely welcome to watch if you haven't. And I had this experience where I was lying down to make the transition, and what happened was I found myself in this like reclined chair, like we have those on at the beach, and I was on a roof, and I saw some people. There was some. I was inside a certain scene, I think, but when I looked to the other side, it was just nothing. It was just a black. It was like this space in the dream was loading. It was not even built up yet. I don't remember if that was the exact experience that I told about in the Dark Rooms, but if not, you should definitely check out that playlist. Interesting things happen. So it can go that way. Other times you can do this, make this transition, and just because you have so much focus and intent on it, you'll end up in a dream where you are still doing the transition in the dream. Those dreams that I would really, be focused on still lying down doing the transition, and people would come and try to talk with me, and I would try to like push them away because I'm very focused right now, not even realizing that I'm already, inside. And it's important for me to go back to the sleep paralysis part, because I know a lot of people are kind of intimidated from sleep paralysis, and some of it's justified, but a lot of it is just from not really understanding what sleep paralysis is. And again, sorry, I'm not going to go into the details of sleep paralysis right now. I'll make a separate video for that because it's a huge, beautiful, beautiful subject. Yes, sleep paralysis is beautiful and amazing once you really understand what is happening. But what I want to point out here is that when you make the conscious transition, you're not necessarily having this experience of sleep paralysis. And I think it is one of the misconceptions that a lot of people think that happens, that they are afraid to go about it because they think they will end up in sleep paralysis. You might, but I think most of the times I didn't, I think. So just putting this out here. Another experience that happens when you're doing this transition, conscious transition, is that you have the experience of going out of body, which is amazing. It's so cool, and also it happens in so many different ways. So like I said before, you can have this like get thrown out of the body experience. You can have, if you act consciously, maybe you can roll out of the body, and sometimes you can fly off. You can go inside the bed and out of the body. You can go out of the body, and when you go out, it's like you're so sticky, and it's hard like to even go, and everything is slowly. You can have this really, 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 I had this around twice. I talk about it with a good friend of mine, which really, resonated with it because it happened to him as well. Sometimes you have this out-of-body experiences that they are so sublime. I don't know how to describe it even. In this moment where you're having the separation from the body, it just feels so beautiful and delightful. And a lot of the times when I'm making the transition, I think about that and I try to make it happen again, but it's so delicate, really. Yes, a lot of beautiful, fascinating experiences can just happen in this in-between state. And I've actually made a Google Sheet, a doc because it's so interesting and because I have this a lot, I thought about like collecting the literature from people who have this experience as well, and just put them in one place so they'll be documented and presented in the future, maybe on a website or something that I will build. I will put the link in the description also. So if any one of you is listening to this and have these experiences and you would like to share them with anyone who would be willing to read them, please check out the Google Sheet doc. Okay, so even though when I'm presenting this as a pure exploration, there are actual steps and things to note when we are doing this. The two steps that you've probably heard everywhere if you've checked out about this subject before is that you have to deepen and you have to make the exit. We'll get to the specifics about that and the misconceptions about this whole process. But the way I want to put this is what we do before we are doing the practice, while the practice, and after the practice. So let's start.